Yeah, g'day YouTubers, Tinker O'Toole again here with another video. Today we're going to make a video, chainsaw grinders for dummies. A lot of people out there just don't know how to use these properly. As simple as what it is, people overheat the tooth, turn it blue, grind too much metal off. So we're going to go through all the functions of the grinder and how to set it up and how to actually use it properly to get a professional finish, second to none. First of all, make sure you're wearing the appropriate PPE. Now you've got aluminium oxide wheels that are ceramic bonded, so there's dust particles from that coming off as it's wearing down, and also the metal chain that's on there. So please make sure that you're wearing the appropriate PPE when using any sort of grinder, as well as this grinder. So the first thing we'll talk about is that when you do get a grinder, make sure you're using the right wheel size. This is a clone of an Oregon 511, so it takes two wheel sizes, 3.2 millimeters and 4.8. That will cover your 1/4 inch, your 3/8 low profile, your 0.325, your 3/8 standard, and your 404. Now, we'll go over the top plate cutting angle. That's the technical term. And the grinding wheel is at an angle. That is a top plate angle. That is the angle that the grinding wheel comes in. It's set at 60 degrees on this particular grinder. There's a knob at the back, and you can adjust the head and move it to different angles. But we're not going to go into all the different angles. 60 degrees is what most people use worldwide, so we're going to just stick with 60 degrees. The next is the top plate, because when we look at a chainsaw tooth, it is referred to as a compounded beveled angle. And that's because there's two angles. That's because you've got this top plate angle here, which is generally 30 degrees, and we're going to use 30 degrees. And you've got another angle, it's on the face. So this is the top plate cutting angle. This is the top plate angle. So don't confuse one with the other. Just remember, top plate, this is top plate, this is top plate cutting angle. We're going to use 30 degrees on here. Now this is for the left tooth, this is for the right tooth, or in actual fact, the left side will do the right tooth, and the right tooth, the right side will do the left tooth. It's just arse about. Now we're going to stick with 30 degrees because 30 degrees, if we look at still recommend 30 degrees for their full chisel and semi-chisel. So we're going to stick with that. The next adjustment you got, and you can't see it, and we'll just have a bit of a look at it, is the cutter or tooth depth. And that's the adjusting knob on the back. So that adjusts how far the grinding wheel comes down into the tooth. And you don't want to be bringing the grinding wheel that deep into the gullet. So just bear that in mind. Don't come down too deep. If you've got a brand new chain, it's a good guide to set your wheel. If you don't, just make sure, if you look at a tooth, you'll see the chrome plating on the bottom, and don't go below this point. Okay, so we've got that. The next thing is the vise on this tilts. Now, it tilts that way and it tilts that way. That's for 10 degrees downward tilt if the manufacturer recommends it. The guide rail, there is an adjustment. We'll zoom in for that one. You'll find out that these type of grinders are fairly common. They'll all have different names. And if you look closely down there on a brand new wheel, I've adjusted this. There's a little tiny gap in there, just over 0.5 millimeter. So you've got the lock nut here, and you can adjust this. So this will slightly put the grinding wheel in the center. So that's what that's for, to center it. There's only a little adjustment. Of course, these days, on the more modern ones, you've got a sliding vise. But for these older style type clones, you've got that there. So that's that. The next thing is the backstop adjustment. So we look at this control here. If we wind it forwards, if we just zoom in again and we have a look at that, we'll just get there. This is the adjustment that moves the mechanism forwards and backwards. So if we zoom right in, you'll see that really good. So move it forwards, move it backwards. Now when you're doing, and then you've got the lock nut there. Now when you've got a brand new chain, this sits in the middle of the guide bar. But when the chain wears down less than half, you've got to make sure that you move this away from the grinding wheel, whether you're doing the left or the right, because if this sits close to the grinding wheel is just going to grind it off. So as the chain wears down, please check and make sure that the grinding wheel, if the grinding wheel is coming close to this, then move it, adjust using the adjustment mechanism, move it away. So that's the way that that works. The next thing to check is that your grinder should have came with a radius card for dressing the wheel. And as you can see, 404, 38, 0.325 and 1/4 inch. So they're all your different gauges there. And it should have also came with a dressing block like that. So the actual grinding wheel itself needs to be dressed every now and then. I wouldn't say every week, but yeah, look, just check it with the radius gauge. And if it looks like it's a little bit out, just give it a quick dress. You don't have to go really dramatic with it. It can be out a little bit. It's not going to have a huge effect on it. And it creates that nice C shape that you see in the tooth, that C shape there. Okay. The next thing on the list is that when you mount the wheel, sometimes when you put a wheel on, it can have a little bit of wheel wobble. If that's the case, you need to loosen the bolt and spin the wheel in different positions. So you can find out that the wheel wobbles, a little bit of wobble's okay, a fraction of a millimetre, and that's about all you want. But if you've got more than a fraction of a millimetre, loosen the hexagonal bolt and rotate it in a different position. And sometimes if you can't get it, you may have to flip it over the other side. Some of the wheels should come with paper on either side. The whole idea of the paper that's on the wheel is also for identification purposes, but it helps the wheel sit central. So the next thing to talk about, that's just gone over all the functions of it. The only modifications I did to this is that I put an LED globe in there, which is much, much more powerful. And if you switch it on, you'll see that it's quite bright. So yeah, really great so you can see what you're doing. And the only other thing I've done is a little modification. There's a little bit of a rubber mat here. So what it does is stop all the powders, all clogging this all up. So it's just easy to clean it. So it's just a little bit of a rubber mat. You can make that out of a bit of rubber if you've got a bit laying around. So the next thing what we'll do is put a chain on there and we'll sharpen the chain. And when I said that this is a guide for dummies, these next two things that I'm going to show you is the most critical. And the first one is, and I'll just talk about it now, but I will actually demonstrate it, that when you pull this wheel down, a lot of people really got no idea how to use a grinder. I've seen some people just get it and just go bang, bang, like that. That is really bad. That's one problem. The second problem is that they put the chain in here, they don't adjust it properly, and they're grinding far too much off the tooth. You only want to be grinding no more than about 0.3 of a millimetre maximum at any time, provided the chain's in good nick and it's not damaged. So we'll set that up, and the correct procedure to grind, I like to use it like this. I like to count 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, and just use a little bit of pressure. If you feel a bit of resistance, then go a bit slower. But you shouldn't get any resistance, not the way that I show you how to do it. Because if you do this slow tap-in motion, 1, 2, 1, 2. It gives the tooth a chance to cool down if it goes to heat up. And you shouldn't get a lot of sparks off it as well. So if you're pulling it down and holding it, you're going to heat the tooth up. It's the same thing if you get any piece of metal and go to a bench grinder and hold the metal, it'll just overheat. It'll turn blue, then it will turn red. You'll heat it up red hot. So any grinders. Now these are aluminium oxide pink wheels. They're the cheapest wheel that are out there. You've got diamond wheels, you've got ABN, CBN, or a mixture of ABN and CBN materials mixed together. They'll run much cooler. The other wheels that you can get are brown, and they're bonded together with rubber. These are bonded together with virtually glass. They call it ceramic, but it's glass for all intensive purposes, as far as I know. It's just maybe it's a special type of glass, but try and get a grit size of 80. If you get really coarse, it's going to leave larger marks in it. So the secret to grinding, to be a professional grinder, is to go very slow. Like I say, slowly. 1, 2, 1, 2. You'll get the hang of it, and you can go sometimes faster. You might be able to go 1, 2, 1, 2. You should be able to put your finger on the tooth. So what we'll do next, we'll set a chain up. We'll go through the setup procedure, how you should feed the chain in there, how you adjust this. And this is a hexagonal wheel. It's a hexa copy. So it doesn't matter. The same principle applies whether you're grinding hexa or whether you're grinding standard semi-chisel or full chisel or whatever. The same procedure is going to apply, and if you do it this way, I will guarantee you that you will improve your grinding skills and you'll end up with a beautiful finish, second to none. Okay, so we've got the grinder all set up, and we'll go over that procedure, and we'll explain everything, and we'll grind this chain up a little bit. And we need to check the rakers or depth gauges after that with a raker gauge tool, and I'll show you both the standard constant gauge tool and the progressive raker gauge tool as well. So first of all, if this chain in here is a 3/8 chain and it takes a 4.7mm wheel, as would a 0.325. If you're doing 1/4 inch or 3/8 low profile, you use a 3.2mm wheel. And as I spoke before, you need to dress the wheel. This is a hexa profile, so totally different. For those that may be interested, we'll just zoom in there and we can show you what this profile looks like if you're considering doing a hexagonal grind. So as you can see, the side of the wheel actually grinds, comes right into the tooth, and we've got a spacing from the side of the wheel to here is 120 degrees, and we've got another 60 degrees here. So as I said before, we're going to tilt this at 60 degrees. Virtually never leaves 60 degrees. So that is set at 60, and we've got this set on 30 degrees. Now that's on the left hand side, but you can see that's a right hand tooth. Now you need to bring the backstop adjustment up so that it barely touches the grinder. Hear that? It's barely touching. Now, if we're to look at the depth, and we'll just adjust this, as you can see, that's way too high. So we'll lower that down into till it reaches the bottom. Right, it reaches the bottom. Then I just touch it so that it's barely off the bottom. Then I need to rotate the wheel, and it's just barely touching. It could possibly go back a touch. So what we'll do now, I want to wind it back just a little bit. Then lock it in a position again, because you can always readjust it. Now that's barely touching. Now, before I spoke about that when using a grinder, in most cases, if it's a light cut, it's just virtually a quick sharp, you won't take any more than about 0.3 of a millimetre off the tooth. So what we will do is measure this tooth now. .31 millimetres. I just want to show you that you don't need to take a lot off. So remember that, 9.31. Bring the grinder wheel down. It's barely touching. So we'll start the grinder wheel. Now remember I spoke before about slight tapping action. Possibly have a little bit more. It's always easy to give it a little bit more than rather take too much off. Then nice slow tapping motion. I think it could go down a touch. So I'm going to lower the adjustment so that the wheel comes a bit deeper into the tooth. Just have a look at that. Probably can't see it. You might be able to see that. Needs more. Not enough off that. Once you get it right, then you can proceed to do all the tooth. Needs a touch more. Now this tooth was ground on another grinder, so that's why I'm taking a little bit more off it than I normally would have. That's where you got to watch it when you're swapping wheels around, and that's perfect. That's good enough, nothing wrong with that. Now, we did say that it was 9.27. So, it may be just under 9 millimetres because I had to take a little bit more than I should have. Actually, it's not bad, look at that. 904. So, 901. So, I was pretty spot on, 0.3 of a millimetre. Now, you work that out. That's all you should need to do on all your chain if it just needs a refresh in sharpening. 0.3 of a millimetre maximum, unless it's damaged, and obviously you've got to do more. So the next thing is that you're going to just continue. Now we'll do one more tooth just for the sake. See, nice and slow. Now there's no more sparks. And look, I can put my finger on that tooth. It's not hot. And you'll see that it's nice and clean. It needs a little bit more. See where my thumbnail is? It hasn't touched there. So what we'll do, as I said earlier before, this was ground with another wheel. And that's what you've got to be careful of, that if you, well, especially the hexagonal grind, you really want the wheel set up and use the same wheel over and over. That's good enough. It's just got a little tiny bit there. Most of the time the cutter only comes down about a mil or so, so I'm not going to worry about doing that. So you would do all that side, and then you would turn it to the 30 degrees on the other side and set it up exactly the same way. Turn the grinder off and set it up exactly the same way, and make sure that you're not going to grind off this. I can see already that it's sticking out a little bit, so it would be just a matter of winding that across a little bit. That's okay. And just take your time, and everything you'll have a professional grind. Now, after that's all done, you really do need to check the rakers. So we'll take this off and we'll explain that. Now, even though I only just did 2 teeth, did you notice I was just pushing it down nice and slow, and then I had to make an adjustment here. If you're using the same wheel, you'll find out that, like an example would be, just say that this wheel is ready now. If I go out and I use 3/4 chains and they were dressed on this, they were ground on this wheel, and I bring them back, I might have to slightly dress it periodically. But if I maintain that shape, then I'll take minimal amount of metal off. And that's what you've got to be sure of, that you're only taking minimal amount. And you don't adjust the backstop too much so it's taking too much of a grind. You're better off doing what I did. Take about 3 or 4 shots at it till you get it right. Once you've got it right, then proceed to do it. And again, take it nice and gentle. Sometimes what I do depends on the chain, because chains aren't cheap, especially if they're expensive chains. I'll do a light grind, I'll have a look at it, then I might pass it through a second pass and do another light grind. Still quicker than file, and it's very, very accurate. So let's assume that all this chain was freshly ground on the left and on the right. This is the typical type of constant depth gauge that a lot of people use from Stihl, and you place it on about 4 teeth. And if we zoom in there, we'll try and zoom in so that you can see. If the raker protrudes out of the tool, it's just a matter of running it across. Now, you do that on every raker about every 3 or 4 times that you sharpen it. The problem with this type of tool is it's only ever going to set a distance of 0.65 of a millimetre between the top of the raker and the top of the tooth. That's okay when the chain's brand new, but as the chain wears down or you've got different length teeth, this needs to can't compensate for the different length teeth. Like an example is, you'll read somewhere and it'll say, oh, look at your shortest tooth, mark it and file or grind them all the same length. Well, you know, that's just garbage. You don't do that. What you do, get yourself a progressive depth gauge like this. This works totally different. Rather than sit over 4 teeth, it'll sit over one individual tooth like that, and then you'll run the file over the top like that. You can see all the scratches on it. This is actually harder than the file, and you've got a hard setting and a soft setting, so hardwood, softwood. The way that this works, when it sits on a tooth, let's say it's on that angle. Now, when you've got a brand new chain, and a 3/8 chain, it's approximately, the tooth is about 10 millimeters in length. As you file the tooth down, this angle will become lower. The lower angle will mean that the raker will protrude out more. And from brand new, you'll go to 0.65 of a millimetre. And by the time you get down to the end of the life, right down the back here, you'll be removing, the distance will be 1.2 millimetres. It's also referred to what we call the attack angle. And by the attack angle, I mean that is an attack angle. That angle there, and it's roughly 6.3 degrees. This type of gauge, at brand new, you'll probably get an attack angle of around about 5.51, something like that there. By the time you get to the end of the life, down to the witness mark here, you're lucky if your attack angle's 3.5. It won't cut as good either. Also, the other thing that happens, that the distance between the tip of the raker and the tip of the tooth, by the time you get down to here, it's going to be 12 millimeters. The rocking motion is different. The attack angle will be lost, and you'll have a very poor attack angle. And that's where this type of gauge, the progressive depth gauge, compensates for that. And that's why it's superior. You can buy it in Husqvarna. They sell them, the progressive depth gauges. They also sell them in the roller guides, a combination. And you can also get them from West Coast Saws in America. But do yourself a favour. These are actually great because they've got the side windows on them, and they're giving you some angles on for the side plate. And you've got your little bar groove tool there. And as you can see, you can use it for 1/4 inch, 3/8, 0.325 and 3/8 pico. But these are chain specific. It starts at FL1 for 1/4 inch, FL2 for 3/8 low profile, FL3 for 0.325, FL4 for 3/8 standard, and FL5 for 404 chain. So it's one size fits one chain, not like the other gauge. So they're chain specific, so make sure that you get them. You won't be able to get them in America. For some reason, they don't seem to sell them, and I've got no idea why, but certainly available here in Australia and probably many places in Europe. They've only been manufacturing this type of gauge for the last 5 years or so. But this type of gauge here was invented by Joseph Burford Cox, who founded Oregon and put a worldwide patent on it. And his gauge had 25 thou at one end and 30 thou on the other end. And that was about in the early 50s. By about 1968, a man that worked at Oregon called Ray Carlton set up his own company, and I'm sure there's a lot of people out there would be familiar with Carlton chain, invented the progressive depth gauge, and it was called Philo plate. And it looked a little bit like that. This looks like a little bit of a Lego man. And he put a worldwide patent on it. And it's used today by a lot of professionals, this type of gauge. So if you can't get a Stihl, try a West Coast Saws. If you can't get a West Coast Saws, go to your Husqvarna dealer, tell them you want a progressive depth gauge. They will still fit the Stihl gauge. Some of the gauges are a little bit fiddly on some of the other chains, but if you use the Stihl gauge, it'll virtually fit anything. So just keep that in mind. I hope this tutorial really helps those people that are not familiar with grinding. Only one last quick look at what you should be doing is make sure that this is set at 60 degrees, standard. This is set at 30 degrees left and right, standard. When you put your chain in and you set it up with a backstop, you have it so that it just touches the wheel. So you set the angle up first. You also set the height of the grinding wheel so that it just touches the bottom, then back it off a fraction of a millimetre, and you adjust it so that the chain barely touches the wheel. That is your starting point. And then you take it nice and slow with these slow off, on, off, on. The grinding wheel, I used to like to count in seconds. 1, 2, 3, 4. By doing it like that, you're giving the chance that when you lift the grinding wheel up, you're giving it a chance to cool down. There is a little bit of air turbulence created by the wheel spinning around. And most importantly, also remember you should be wearing a dust mask. You don't want to be breathing in any particles of metal or aluminium oxide off the wheel. So make sure that you're wearing some sort of respirator or some sort of dust mask so that you're not breathing that in. Anyway, thanks for watching. Bye for now, and subscribe to the channel, and any comments are welcomed.